I'm going to show you some mods for the TSL60. The main thing I'm going to cover first is putting 100 picofarad capacitors on the volume controls. This is a standard modification done to any manufacturer's amp to brighten up the tone, especially at lower volumes. Now, for other people new to Marshall, there's an effects loop on the back, and you can put a jumper cable across the in and output jacks. And this basically what this will do, it'll turn your effects mix knob into a boost. Give you some more dynamics, boost the sound, works real well. Pull the power tubes, pull out all the screws that hold the chassis in the box. Unplug your reverb cables, and at this point you can just, grab the chassis here on this, I don't know if that's the output transformer, but you grab that and you grab this side here and just lift the chassis right on out. All the knobs just pull straight up and off. There's no set screws that hold them on. And then just remove all the nuts. Remove this nut over here too as well. You'll need to mark these cables so you know exactly where they go when you put everything back. I actually just put a black mark on the top cable and no mark on the bottom. On this side over here we also have two browns. I marked, put a black mark on the top. Just as long as you get these plugged back in all right, you're okay. This is the crunch board. You can actually just pull it out, flip it around, put it back in the opposite way. That'll kind of hold it in place while you work on it. The red tape there is to keep the capacitor leads from shorting out. You can cut those leads way back and probably not have to worry about putting the tape there. When looking at the volume pod from the front, there's going to be 4 pins. So you're going to count over 1, 2, 3, 4. The capacitor always goes on the middle 2. So if you follow the middle 2 all the way to the back, I just hooked them on here at the back. You could easily hook them onto the front ones, which either choice, that's up to you. If you hook them up here on the front, you're going to have to tape over the traces on the circuit board so nothing shorts out. Here's another close-up of this. Now obviously you're looking at 6 pins. The far left and the far right are just mounting pins. We're really talking about the 4 pins that are up close, and again you're going to just solder to the 2 middle, and as long as you're connected to those, your capacitor is going to be connected correctly. You can practice on this crunch board, get a feel for how the soldering goes. You'll find that when we do the clean channel volume control and the lead volume control, I believe they're actually easier. This may be the most difficult one, but this is an easy access board to get to, so if you want to try different values, you might want to practice on this one first. I had to come back on the crunch channel and resolder one of the capacitor leads. The first soldering I did on it wasn't strong enough, and you can see I've got the whole thing just taped down. Anything that you can use to just make this hands-free, where you don't have to hold that capacitor and have everything lined up, so you just got to add a little dab of solder, that's in your best interest. I suggest getting out your magnifying glass and really inspect those solder leads when you're done. Really make sure you got a nice clean job on it. and that you're not shorting any of the pins out. When doing these mods, I recommend going to Radio Shack and getting this slim 20 watt soldering iron. You can see the one on the right also has a bulky shaft, and it's got a set screw. This can burn other components inside the chassis while you're soldering. Another thing about the slim soldering iron on the left, it has other tips that you can use. This is an extremely fine point tip right here, and I recommend putting it on and using it. When you go to solder these capacitors onto these volume pot leads, they're very, very close together, and using something like this will prevent you from, shorting out the pins by accidentally soldering two of the potentiometer pins together. So you have to be, this is very finesse type of soldering. You need to remove these 3 screws. Once you remove those, you'll be able to lift the faceplate off. The faceplate will lift straight off. It's very easy. This is an example of one I already have soldered in place. You can see it's on the 2 middle pins. And I'll show you how you go about positioning this. You need to have it holding itself in place while you do the soldering. I'll show you how that's done. So we're going to take a capacitor, and this is a 100 picofarad capacitor, and we're going to bend the leads. So here you can see I bent the leads, pretty much a right angle. We're going to take a piece of electrical tape. This is about 2.5 to 3 inches long, and we're going to poke some holes in the center for the capacitor leads to go through. So there we go, we got a couple holes. They're spaced as far apart as the capacitor leads. I have the capacitor now taped, and you can see the leads come out on the other side. I have taped over the capacitor leads so it can't short on anything. This is the sticky side, by the way. You take this taped capacitor and you slip it in, get it in position, and then you can just tape this back here. Now you'll have to do a little bit more messing around with this. You want to get, this really needs to be done in a manner where your leads are, held in place, close, exactly where you're going to solder them. So you may have to adjust this a little bit. I appeared to put mine on a little low, so I'm going to bring it up higher. Now my leads are not quite long enough. You really want the lead resting right on top of the pin that it's going to be soldered to. So I may have to go back and change my angle and make sure this length is longer. The whole idea is this piece of tape holding the capacitor should have everything in position so your hands are free to do the little dab of solder that you're going to put on this. This one was already done, and you can see the capacitor leads easily stretch right on over to the pin, and this made for a very simple solder job. When soldering this, just put a little solder on the tip of the soldering iron and let that flow off the tip onto the capacitor lead and then onto the potentiometer lead. Don't try to feed a lot of solder onto this, or you could end up soldering 2 of these together and then come back and have to do a cleanup, and it could get messy. Again, this is finesse soldering. You got to be very, very finesse with this, very fine. Don't try and put a lot of solder down here. You can vary these. You can make each channel very different from each other. Cathode capacitor, I changed the value, and then I also went to C87, which is also a cathode capacitor, and I changed its value down. C87 is over by the second preamp tube. Here's the second preamp tube, and you can see there's another, we have the other capacitor, which is C87. This is capacitor 63, which I changed. I believe the standard is a 100 UF, and I dropped it down to a .044. This cuts quite a lot of bass out. So if you go this route, you'll have to experiment. Well, after reassembling things, make sure you check your wires back down here on your power switches. Make sure they're correct. And then make sure that you have your master volume knob all the way down before you turn the amp on. In case you have potentiometers shorted out from your soldering. You'll just want to raise the volume a little bit and check all your channels.